Before the Mario Kart 8 Booster Course Pass, I had a mostly negative opinion of Mario Kart 8. And as a result, pretty much every track in the game, like I want to say 75% of the tracks, were C tier or lower. I feel like the developers took a very different approach to the DLC, in which they actually were down to let players have fun. Now, we don't really get to see the height of that exactly until much later, because I feel like it just gets better and better. Many would argue that the BCP tracks are inferior entirely because they are a port from a mobile game that seemingly everyone hates. To which I would respond, your point? The entirety of Mario Kart Wii feels cheaply done. It's the broken stuff that makes it fun. It's what makes it have charm. And even then, I'm not just gonna hate on them because they made a smart business decision. It's just literally a smart move. Cause like, if you're gonna support a game for 10 years, that seems clear to me at least, that they've not had a single fucking clue where to take Mario Kart. And that's the spot you're going to be in, and you're going to have this mobile game that's going to celebrate the legacy of Mario Kart for all these years, whether people want to dogpile it for the fact that it embraces a lot of the modern day gaming features, that's not my problem. Key thing is, they're still remaking all of these tracks. They're going through all the effort of remaking these tracks. So if it comes down to it, it just fucking makes sense to put them in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And frankly, I don't care if they're a little bit lower effort, because I feel like where they lack effort in terms of like graphical fidelity or polish, or even just a little bit of bugginess, I feel like they make up for in the fact that they're just better tracks that are being put into this game, that I otherwise has a problem of every track feeling like there's not a dynamic that happens, like a lot of the things you do don't matter. I can say this pretty confidently that the vast majority of the tracks that were added in the Booster Course Pass improved the game for the better in terms of making meaningful races that I actually enjoyed doing.
Okay, but why couldn't the early waves have just looked more like the final waves?
And I feel like that's partially a problem of them putting an entirely new team in charge of Mario Kart, and like they're not going to be able to match the art style. Like, we can all agree, the Booster Course Pass wasn't Nintendo's A team. It wasn't their best guys on the job. It was just, we have these resources, we're putting it in the game, that's all it really needs to be. And I will never understand people who care this much about the graphics of stuff, but I understand if it's your thing, then it's your thing. I can't take away your eyes and replace them with that of a frog, but like, I don't mind. And I'm just like, what I see is I see good races. Paris Promenade. Paris Promenade is a pretty dang good first showing for the Booster Course Pass, and even gives you a pretty good split path, where the right path is a slightly more scenic and long route that gets you access to items, and the left path cheekily takes you to the side, cutting through this massive shape that takes up the main minimap. Being faster not necessarily because it covers a lot less distance than the right path, but because the road is curving more, meaning that the natural mini-turbos you get is where that time save comes in. And even after you solve that small little logic puzzle to find out which route is better, that's not the end of all the thinking you really end up having to do. Because when the paths reconverge, the people who took the other route will have access to another item, which could leave you wide open. And while this doesn't exactly happen a lot in practice, since they converge right at another set of items, there's still really meaningful effort here to make both paths have a reason to exist, and they're not that much of a difference in terms of time saved. It's a basic enough dynamic that already sells that the Booster Course Pass has a little bit of depth to think about, but it keeps things completely tame. And just in case you didn't get the memo from the first 2 laps, you then drive the 3rd lap backwards and see this faster route from a different angle in a way that draws emphasis to the pipes. And while your attention is drawn to it, your first assumption might be to think that this is a mushroom shortcut. After all, the ground texture does change here to accommodate the pipes. But then all it takes is just one race with a slightly experienced player and just a mild willingness to watch what they do, and suddenly this subtle secret is blown wide open and you will never see this track the same way again. And while a lot of people, I'm sure, just took the left route when encountering this fork for the first time, the path of least resistance is to drive straight. And I would wager the vast majority of players had this exact experience in discovering the best routes for this track. Oh yeah, and I kinda glossed over the fact that we're going backwards now, huh? What? In order to take advantage of the fact that Mario Kart Tour tracks were designed to be able to have multiple different layouts in order to save resources, rather than just picking the one that they thought would work best in Mario Kart 8, they decided that the best way to implement tour tracks into Mario Kart 8 would be to stitch together all the different routes and to create something that is entirely new. And what better way to demonstrate such a versatile track design strategy than to have the first 2 laps play exactly the same way, only to mix it up right at the start of lap 3 with a new route
that does nothing but send us right back where we came from, and then have us strive what we've already memorized in the opposite direction. It may be the most simple tour track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but it has no shortage of richness and depth that's easy to discover, all while completely blowing away the base game tracks in terms of just how much there is to learn. And unlike a lot of the optimizations you may find on some of the base game tracks, you could have easily discovered these strategies entirely on your own. And I think that's actually what Nintendo completely intended to be the case. But that's enough from me. Let's answer the question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind and see what Tevlev has to say about it.
Hey everybody, it's your best friend Tevlev. I've been summoned to talk about this track. Paris has turns. If you love turning, you're gonna love Paris. It also has a piranha plant, but we have to rank it. Where are we placing it? That's a little complicated because a lot of the city tracks kind of blend together. They have distinct differences from each other, but are they that distinct compared to the rest of the tracks? Not really. There's tracks in this game where you're riding along an erupting volcano that's sinking into the lava. Just compare the two concepts. Which looks more fun? You don't need spectacle for it to be fun, but it just helps if it has something to make an impression on you. Oh, that's the one with the train. That's the one with the pinballs. That's the one with the traffic lights. It's just not the same. And this applies to Paris as well, because you can't do anything too crazy because they still need to be based on, the source material. It's going to end up being a pretty simple course, and that's not bad. It's not so bad that I'm getting Paris syndrome while I'm playing Mario Kart. It's still good, just feels average. But I do have one big issue. One giant issue that not many people seem to talk about. Paris Promenade is allegedly based on Paris, but I didn't see Remy once. Not even a cameo from Linguini.
Rat patootie!
It's just weird to me that Nintendo would jump through the legal hoops to obtain the copyright license from Disney to use their Paris IP, and they didn't even negotiate more to get Remy and Linguini? Huh! Maybe let's just be happy we got Ratatouille representation at all, and let's just take the track for what it is. So Paris Promenade is fine. It's better than the other city tracks, like the one based on the Mario movie, or the one based on Grand Theft Auto 5. So with all that being said, it's like a C. It's alright. It's not doing a whole lot. But sometimes in Mario Kart, all you need is some nice turns, right? Back to you, TJ Maxx.
I'm so sorry. I just did not have the heart to tell him that France is real.
Toad Circuit, I think literally every single person and their mother will tell you this is the worst course in the game. And I am going to make all of you guys hate me. Because I think it's a perfectly acceptable circuit track. I don't know why people hate this track as much as they do. Toad Circuit opens with an extremely satisfying, just long turn that you're just allowed to build up a purple mini turbo on, and it feels very satisfying to release. It has a pretty fun winding section right after the tunnel that I think allows you just to snake, and it ends with a pipe shortcut that actually requires a decent degree of skill to be able to navigate correctly. All this results in a pretty middle of the road, acceptable circuit track. If you can ignore the pettiness of the grass has more to it than just being the color green. Brother in Christ.
I just don't care.
Choco Mountain might be a contender for my favorite track in the game. It definitely takes my top spot at the moment. I have a bit of a story for Choco Mountain. There was a very short period of my life where I actually did attempt doing competitive clan wars in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Choco Mountain quickly became one of my favorite tracks because it has the very distinct role of being what's called a drafter track, in which it enables a slight advantage towards racers who start in sort of an upper middle spot instead of just being in first, which is a very interesting dynamic because of the way that the track lays out. It just happens to set a lot of the pack up to be able to get drafts off of each other, which results in just this weird shift that I think just offers this dynamic that no other track has. Other than that, it is a contender for one of my two favorite Mario Kart songs in any game ever, and it's impossible for me to feel unhappy while listening to Choco Mountain's music.
But TJ, this all seems like decent enough reasons to like the track, but one of your favorites in the entire game? Yeah, kinda. Everything I mentioned before is in addition to the fact that I think it has genuinely very good races. Unless I'm literally going into the final set of item boxes in last place, it still feels like I have a chance no matter what happens on here. Every single turn offers a very unique setup for item play. and every turn feels incredible to execute. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned when getting really into Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is that a track doesn't need some massive mind-boggling feature in order to be an incredible showcase of this game at its best. And while I won't fault anyone for saying that it's bland, I genuinely feel like this track is better than the sum of its parts.
Coconut Mall. This is another extremely well-made track. Coconut Mall in Mario Kart Wii went from being one of my least favorites in Wii to being one of my favorites in 8 Deluxe. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Coconut Mall, they focused on exactly the right kind of things. Because in Wii, Coconut Mall kind of had like custom track syndrome, where it felt like just like the world geometry was really weird. I feel like the lines that you take in Wii didn't really benefit as much in that regard. What Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did, I feel like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has had the very clear pattern, especially with its booster course pass, of wanting to make the tracks feel as good to drive in a general sense as it possibly can. And what that results in is I feel like just an overall improvement over Coconut Mall, because I feel like the weird bumpiness of the Wii version gets improved on a lot here, and then just the rest of it is just Mario Kart 8's a physics engine doing its magic, where I feel like Mario Kart 8 is at its best when you have something you can actively be thinking about doing. And Coconut Mall provides that in spades, where there's constantly either a very satisfying turn to be taking, or right as you're leaving one of those turns, you have a ramp that you can low trick. All of this just culminates in just constantly at every moment of the race, you're doing something. And that feels very fun. Tokyo Blur. Tokyo Blur, it tries. Man does it try. And I think it really does show that it's a Wave 1 track. They wanted to do something with Tokyo Blur, and they certainly tried. In the context of Mario Kart Tour, Tokyo Blur is the worst Mario Kart track of all time. There are only 2 item boxes and there is nothing to do for the entire track. It's the worst in the series in Tour. And man, did they really try to make it something in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, as it being one of the most notable city tracks that doesn't just change on one of the laps, but on all 3 of them. It was the first one that did this, that really tried to push this idea of like, oh, okay, but like these tour tracks are really basic in concept and like what they do, but if you put all of the versions together, you can make something. You can have something similar like a woohoo loop, where it's like you have different things happening each lap. Tokyo Blur really wanted to do that, but it doesn't matter, because Tokyo Blur just doesn't have anything. It's one of the worst Mario Kart 8 syndrome tracks in the entire game, where it feels like items do not matter. It doesn't really feel that satisfying to drive on anything except 200cc. On 200cc, kind of fun. Otherwise, it just takes so long to get anywhere. There's no shortcuts, there's no item play. It just doesn't really do anything well. And it's like, man, I can commend their effort for trying. It does not pay off. Shroom Ridge. This is Toad's Turnpike done right. I can't say like there's a whole lot more to it than that, but like, I mean, hey, I don't have any complaints with it. That's like that's gold star. It does what it needs to. It has a variety of shortcuts. It's a traffic course where you actually feel like you need to worry about the traffic, even if the cars themselves aren't that much faster, if at all. They make up for it by the fact that it's a much more windy course and pretty narrow too, which actually does make them pretty difficult to avoid. Because you'll be minding your own business, and then you'll be making like a 90-degree turn, and then suddenly there's a car right in your face. And like, you could technically anticipate that, but like, it's all part of the track, and it's like, yeah, that's how you do a traffic course. And like, it surprises me that so few tracks are able to succeed at making a successful traffic course. But this one succeeds, and like, yeah, no complaints, it does everything correct. Sky Garden. A lot of people have a hate boner for Sky Garden. They simplified it quite a lot, and it's not the GBA version that people remember. I get that, people hate that, but I think what we're left with is still a pretty good track. If you ignore the fact that it's a little bit neutered from its GBA version, I think what you still end up with here is an enjoyable track that is fun to race. I think top of B tier is probably appropriate. Because I would compare Sky Garden, the version that we have here, I would elect to compare it to an F-Zero 99 thing, where you have Port Town 2 and you have Port Town 1. I feel like this is the Port Town 1 to what would be the original GBA version's Port Town 2.
I understand that people just want more depth out of it. I get it. I think it's still a perfectly acceptable track, and I still enjoy racing it. It's personally one of my favorite looking tracks in the entire game. Base game included, by the way. The fucking way the cloud textures like scroll across it, it's gorgeous, and I love that a lot. And I feel like I get a lot of meaningful variance in like how my Sky Garden races go, but it's a different course, and it's still what we're left with is still a pretty decent course. It's not the original. I still enjoy racing it. It's still an L, because I think I agree that the original version is better. But I think I do still like what we got, and this isn't the Sky Garden that they really say it is, but it's still a decent track overall.
Sharing this sentiment is my good friend Koopa Caper.
Sky Garden is my second favorite track in the game. Now, I've heard the argument. Oh, but it's not the same track as it was on the GBA. Okay, sure, but whether or not it's the same track as the one on the GBA doesn't matter. This track sucks because it's not exactly how it was. Why does that matter? I don't see y'all complaining about Bowser Castle 3 being different. I can understand rating it lower because you don't think the layout is quite as good as it used to be, but one of the worst tracks in the game? How? This is one of the most fun tracks in the entire game. Built to the brim with cuttable corners, this is one of the few tracks where it feels like it's anyone's game, even if you're in 12th on the final lap. If you get the right items, you can make huge moves and make it to the front, which makes for incredibly dynamic races where you never really know who's gonna win. But the shortcuts don't control the entire race. You're not playing the entire game around that final shortcut. If you have the mushrooms to make it through, sure, you're gonna make it to the front, but you could still get caught by an item if you don't have defense on you. And if you're going first around that last corner, you're not out of luck. I seriously don't understand how you can hate this track if your only criticism is, it's not like how it was. It's really not that big of a deal if there's some minor changes. Even if you think it's a different track, it's not, then judge it on its own merits. Don't just blindly hate because you hate change. What's here is great. The music is fun, the track looks cool, and yo, holy shit, it's my cousin, Koopa Kyle.
Anyway, rather than lingering on that which was not, let's talk about what is. One of the best tracks in the game, Ninja Hideaway. This track has probably the most degree of decision making that you will make in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Every single section in Ninja Hideaway has a purpose to exist. You take the top route if you want to farm coins. You have the main bottom route if you want to focus on speed and you don't happen to get the items you want to have. That or you're just wanting to play it safe with your front run. And you have the shortcut, which even first place can take at the cost of giving up their defense, which I think is an incredible dynamic. And it's like, all right, that's just like the main section, though. What about after you leave the temple? No, after the glider section, it continues because again, you're given the top and bottom route, where you can take the top route for a little bit of slower lines, but like, no one ever takes the top route, so you can guarantee you'll be safe up there. And on top of that, if you're playing 200, that top route can lead to probably one of the most badass shortcuts in the entire series, where you shroom off of that like top rack banister all the way to the line, probably like one of the most treacherous gap jumps in the history of the series. And all of that while on the bottom route there's still all these mini turbos and just different ways things can play out. Like every single route has a reason to exist, and you can swap between almost any of them at like any time, and that is so fucking cool. It's astounding to me that the track with this much thought put into it even exists. This is like some custom track level of thinking, where like absolute like Mario Kart Wii Pro would look at this and be like, okay, how can I make every single one of these things matter? And they did it. Way too confusing? Okay, I have definitely heard that it's a very different experience for Inside Drift bike users. I think Inside Drift does struggle a bit more on Ninja Hideaway, if my understanding is correct. Look, I can only speak on my behalf. I can't speak on behalf of every single person that exists. And if that's a problem that exists, then I'm sorry that the game is the way that it is. I'm playing what feels good to me. New York Minute is like an acceptable degree of a track. Do I ever vote for it? No, but like I think I have lukewarm feelings about it. It's a good track. It has some decent like different route splits, but like there's not really a lot to it that I can say that I like really like. It's just overall just a decent feeling track. I like it's just a well-scaled track that I think plays well. A couple like decent enough shortcuts here and there. Otherwise, just kind of has some satisfying lines. There's a couple grass cuts that are fun.
And on that note, even though it has some pretty nice grass shortcuts, it can feel weirdly restrictive at other points. Like when you're driving through this park, it really does feel like you should be able to shroom through these trees and get a better shortcut out of this.
But instead, you are denied the ability to take this path because Lakitu decides to go back to his old ways. Otherwise, it just kind of suffers from being one of the more basic city tracks they put into this game. Mario Circuit. People hate this track. I don't know why. I don't think it's like amazing, but it's a good track. It's a good track that has good lines. I like voting for it. I think there's a reason why of all the Mario circuits, this is the one that comes back more than any other. And I think it's because it is the one that has the most to offer in terms of just the different types of turns that you can take. It has a large variety of different turns, and all of them play together in making a pretty just decent circuit track. That said, it is a bagger track. I have lukewarm feelings towards it. I'm not like usually going to vote for it. It's basic and it's generic, but I feel like given what we got from this booster pass, it's a brand of generic that we don't really feel oversaturated on. Would I be happy if every single track was a Mario Circuit 3? Fuck no. But it fills a niche in this pack that I think goes a long way of just being like a decent, just heavy off-road track that's not like too oversaturated, doesn't overstay its welcome too much. It does exactly what it needs to. Kalimari Desert is a stroke of fucking genius because I feel like any person who ever grew up with Mario Kart 64 has this nostalgia trip that you hit. There's all of that nostalgia working in favor of Kalimari Desert. And then 7 goes and fucks it up. Not necessarily even 7's fault. Because I think a lot of the inherent charm of what makes Kalimari Desert what it is in Mario 64 is that Mario Kart 64 is an inherently janky Mario Kart game. Nothing quite feels right in Mario Kart 64. Because it's literally their first venture into 3D. And they're still trying to figure out their identity. And because of that, while a lot of Mario Kart tracks are designed in a regard that each turn is fun to take and that it leads to a meaningful racing experience, some of them tend to just lean into weird gimmicks. I think that's why its Rainbow Road is so freaking long. It's just this weird endurance trip. It's why I think Yoshi Valley exists with all these routes, like, oh, what are you gonna take? Like, ooh. It's why Moo Moo Farm exists with like the mole RNG. Like, there's just a lot of Mario Kart 64 that is just embracing its level of jank, and that degree of jank, while able to create extremely charming situations like Kalimari Desert, where the entire race can come to a complete halt just because there's a train on the track. That's hilarious in 64, could never work in any other Mario Kart game. So what do? They have the first lap go completely as normal, where you should almost never actually get affected by the train being in your path. And then it's like, okay, well, you're going to take the same route as 7, where it's like you're going to have to either brake or there's going to be these overpowered shortcuts with the glider ramps. And it's like, no, that's when the second lap decides, no, we're implementing this train as embracing a Mario 64 style of jank, but we're doing it in our own way. Because now, the second lap, you're driving at the train on the tracks. So rather than having the train be this obstacle that forces you to stop the race and wait for it to pass, you are now facing it head on, forced into like what's left of the track for this section. And when you get to the other side of that, you get the opportunity of choosing between staying on the track until you leave it to finish your third lap, or taking the normal route, and actually, if you're not on a good enough pace, having the same thing happen to you that happens in Mario Kart 64, where your path actually gets blocked by the train. You are given the choice on the kind of 64 jank you want to embrace. You can take the slower but safer route of going on the outside line, or you can take the inside line, fully accepting that if you're not on a good enough pace, that you are fucked. So yeah, Kalimari Desert pretty good. I love this track. And the way it goes about completely rebranding a Mario Kart 64 style of jank completely deserves its own praise. Waluigi Pinball is a weird one. I don't like Waluigi Pinball. Or at least not that much. But I feel it's only fair to compare it to Neo Bowser City, because I feel like it shares a very common trait in which it itself isn't that dynamic of a track where it feels like item play matters in any meaningful capacity, or that it feels like there's a lot you can do to affect a really bad front run. But other than that, it's just kind of a track that rewards your fundamentals. It's just a narrow track where there's pinballs that are very easy to avoid. Once you've raced this track like a good 2 or 3 times, you know the path that the pinballs take. They're really easy to avoid, and even if you do hit them, it doesn't even feel like it affects your race in any meaningful capacity. It's a cool theming, I guess, but it's like it doesn't feel like it really amounts to anything. I used to genuinely hate this track for exactly the reasons I laid out, in a very similar way that I hate Neo Bowser City. But I've seen the light, and I've seen that it definitely has a lot of appeal to it that I can enjoy. But for a track as whimsy as Waluigi Pinball, you probably don't want to hear all this technical stuff. So here's Salty DK Dan to tap into some of that core of what makes this track so beloved.
Waluigi Pinball is epic and awesome, and it's for two different reasons. One, it's pinball, and two, it's Waluigi. I may be biased though, because I really like Waluigi, and he's cool and awesome and long. But yeah, I just like how this course is so simple, yet it feels so overstimulating. It just tickles my brain in just the right way. Plus the song is a bop. If you're not into the song, then you're not a real human being that exists. You're some sort of shape-shifting monster of a thing. So, yeah.
That brings us to Sydney Sprint. This is what a lot of people will consider one of their more favorite tour tracks. This is middle of the road for me. Sydney is a very cool track the first few times you race it, but after a while you begin to notice that races on it do tend to feel very similar. The first few times I played Sydney Sprint, I was like, wow, this is an incredibly unique track where it genuinely feels super exciting to go through. But over time, it just tends to get saturated and just feel very much the same song and dance over and over again. There's not a lot of shortcuts on it. I guess there's some cool set pieces you can trick off of. It's alright, and it can give some good races. One thing I can say, I really do like the fact that it's one of the more narrow tracks in the game. I especially feel like before the DLC, Mario Kart 8 was in need of a lot more narrow tracks, and ones that don't feel like you're trapped in this box. It does a lot right, but it doesn't feel like it does everything perfect. I like playing on it. It's a good city track. It's not one of my favorites, though. Snowland. Snow motherfucking land. I love this track. I love this track so fucking much. Oh my god. Before I get too carried away about this, I'm gonna pass this off to Chair G Tables, my ultimate rival, and he will tell you all about how this track has changed over the years.
Snowland is quite a simple track, but I think it's one of the coolest tracks. I remember playing Mario Kart Super Circuit. I boot up the game, pick time trials because I didn't know how to read yet at that age. But that experience was magical because I didn't even know how to race. All I did was drive around the track, bump into snowmen, laugh at the window that says "Ghost data could not be saved," just because I thought every error window in the computer was super hilarious, along with the fact that the destroyed snowman sprite looked like a funny KO pose to me. It is indeed a very fun snowland to drive around. Just like with most GBA tracks in Mario Kart 8, the setting of this place feels different compared to how you would originally envision it in Mario Kart Super Circuit. But I really like what they did here because it feels more like a direct upgrade rather than changing it to a track that feels unrecognizable from the original. The big speed boost early in the track is no longer there, but I feel like being able to do the big ass sexy shortcut was a perfect replacement for it, as it's essentially around the same area too. After that section, you go through an icy road with a hole that you could fall into within that turn. I really agree with this change, as having puddles in the middle of the road in the original can really break your flow sometimes. Another cool change that they had here was moving the ramp from a wall you can drive straight into to the final turn of the track. This makes a lot more sense with the design of the track. It's just an open section on the wall now, and the ramp was moved to where the bridge is. It just feels more satisfying to jump towards a bridge than just jump over a simple wall. Overall, this simple track just feels so nice. The atmosphere is just perfect. The track is just easy to comprehend, and the design makes it easy to know where to turn naturally. I do miss the funny spinning penguins in the original, but I won't complain about the multiple penguins waddling around together and sliding around the ice. The one big thing that made me sad though, is that bumping over snowmen just makes them completely disappear, rather than putting them in that hilarious collapse KO pose. And most importantly, the ghost data could not be viewed doesn't show up anymore when you bump over them, because our technology is too strong now. That made me sad.
So on the topic of GBA limitations, one thing that Super Circuit really has to its benefit is that because of this primitive technology, they really have to squeeze out some of the best just feeling track layouts in the series. But Snowland in particular takes it a step further. And I think it is on Snowland where we can really see that the Booster Course team's approach to track design is vastly different from the people who designed the Wii U version a decade ago. Because this version of Snowland is the first track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe to introduce an expert shortcut that wasn't possible in the previous version of Mario Kart. And man, is it a cool one. As you just start this satisfying drift, then hop over this massive perilous gap, and then make it out the other side with only minimal adjustment needed to get you right back where you need to be. And despite this shortcut being arguably the biggest one in all of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it still doesn't completely kill the integrity of frontrunning. And I would argue that Snowland does this better than any other track in the game, because the moving item boxes are a dynamic element that stops item play from getting stale, and always makes you have to think on your toes about how you're going to approach a given situation. And it is for all of these reasons that it is a contender for my favorite track in all of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Unlike Mushroom Gorge. Mushroom Gorge is such a weird case. I want to love this track so much, but its limitations cannot be ignored. Mushroom Gorge, don't get me wrong, Mushroom Gorge reinforces everything I said about Snowland. The fact that the gap jump is possible at all in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is baffling to me. I would have never seen that coming in a million years. I thought Mario Kart 8 represented an era of Nintendo in which they no longer liked having fun, by which I mean they no longer liked having these really obscure expert shortcuts that like a few people will put in the time to master and that most casuals probably won't even know about. But they made the gap jump possible. And not only that, it's one of the most difficult shortcuts in the game, and it's always going to be way more stylish than anything that Hyrule Circuit could dream of. So with all this praise, why do I put it in C tier? One simple reason. It was not designed for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Mushroom Gorge in Mario Kart Wii, they went through the process of giving you complete and absolute control over every single aspect about how you hit a mushroom in Wii. In this game, the few like mushroom-esque elements they had in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did not offer nearly that degree of freedom. And they tried to make up for it by making it so that the mushrooms are just way bigger, making it so that as long as you're going in the general right direction that you'll be okay. But like, I'm not gonna lie, that trick doesn't really go very far. Not only that, Mushroom Gorge is home to one of the most unintuitive pieces of Mario Kart 8 tech in the entire game, which is known as a super bounce, where if you release a mini turbo right at the same time as you're hitting a mushroom, you get a massive speed boost. And this is a problem because not only is that something that you would never discover on your own, but it's something that is not accessible to some players, strictly due to the choice of vehicle they use. And that's fucked up. And it's weird because Mushroom Gorge is simultaneously the poster child of the fact that the booster course cares about doing things in a way faithful to the older games that they come from and like the jank that come with them, but simultaneously the struggles of making some of those things work in Mario Kart 8. So as a result, it's high highs and low lows. Skyhigh Sundae is a really interesting one. You take one look at the layout of Skyhigh Sundae, and you would probably expect me to say, oh, it's here we go again. It's another Berry Park, or it's another Excite Bike. And while I can't say it's one of my favorites, it at least makes it to the middle of the road. And to help tell you why, here's Pirate Kong from Designing For.
Of all the tracks that the booster course introduced that were weird chimeras of 8 and Tour, Skyhigh Sundae is very clearly the one that's the most Tour-coded. Now, Tour is barely a racing game. It's more like when you try to chain manuals in a Tony Hawk game to get a big combo and trick from one end of the course to another. And Sundae is perfectly built around that. Look at the way the coins are spaced. In most tracks, you would need to drift further out and take a less tight line in order to nab them. But nope, Sundae just says, eat 'em up, eat 'em up, eat 'em up. They're right in your lines. Right after every jump, there's a perfect trail of them in the center of this big turn. It's free. There's a section with jumps one right after the other. The big turn near the end is right after a set of item boxes, so you can combo right out of it. The only real flat stretches of the track are the starting line, which counts as a combo in Tour anyway, and the section in the middle where you're traveling uphill on these ice cream pallets, which you would have to plan to save a usable item for in Tour in order to extend your combo. Otherwise, every inch of Skyhigh Sundae is devoted to making you do something at all times. A perfect loop of items and coins and tricks to let loose with, a flawless burst of speed as you manage to score a perfect run with not just ease, but style. It is perfection! Shame it kinda sucks, doesn't it? I mean, look at these free tour assets for Coconut Cafe and, oh, we don't know what to put here, so here's some paratroopers. Friggin' loop with lots of items and jumps. This is just fancy Baby Park. And I don't go to Baby Park to be fancy. I go there because I enjoy human suffering. This isn't even good, Tony Hawk. It's not like Bowser's Castle 2T. It's like the Sean Palmer of Mario Kart tracks, okay? I mean, who would ever want to play Sean Palmer?
Yeah, I reckon someone would have to be pretty sad to have played and optimized Sean Palmer. Don't look at that! Stop! I feel like Skyhigh Sundae, even though it's very basic in design, the way the item boxes are set up allows you to strategize a bit, like, you can go for the one extra item box in the ice cream cone that everyone goes for, or you can try to instead just try to get 2 different boxes in the same ring. The staircase is a little bit awkward, but like it still feels decently fun. Then you have like the part where you feel the anti-grav section, where you can kind of like do something similar to path switching on Mario Kart 8 Rainbow Road. It's not like nearly as good, but it feels fun. Everything I know about Mario Kart tells me that this should be just an inferior version of either Baby Park or Excitebike. But something on this track makes it actually enjoyable to race on. Maybe it's the existence of fall boundaries, maybe it's the pointless path switching I like doing, or maybe it's just my desperate attempt to say something different from everyone else about this track. But in my opinion, there is something here. It's not amazing, but it's passable. Much like Mario Kart Tour, and yes, Sean Paul. We'll now get to London Loop. This is another track that, over time, I've just come to accept. I don't have any strong opinions on it. It plays well enough. The biggest thing that I think about when I think of London Loop is I like the chain jumps. I like the one that goes onto the road. I like the one in the middle, and I especially like the one that goes through the Thames River. It's a really cute detail, but like other than that, gameplay-wise, it has the right number of shortcuts, and it gives decent races. It's by no means one of the most entertaining of tracks in the game, but it's certainly one that plays really good, and there'll never be a time where I don't want to race on it. And you know what? It's fun to drive, and that alone, I think, warrants putting it in B tier. That leaves us with Boo Lake. GBA never misses. Boo Lake is a great track. In a really weird way to me, I feel like Baby Park in this game fails to capture any sort of chaos. I feel like I can take a lot of joy in a different kind of chaos that Boo Lake brings. It has a smaller expert shortcut at the very end. Otherwise, it's just kind of one of the more just tricky tracks in terms of the turn layouts. And because of that and the fact that it's just really narrow, means that item play is very prominent. Taking the right lines is difficult but very rewarding. And there's nothing more chaotic than doing a 200cc Boo Lake race. Like, that shit is insanity. You take a 200cc Boo Lake race, you come out a changed man. And it's a fun time all the way through. I love every moment of Boo Lake. It does what it needs to. But what does my good friend Golden Brawler have to say about it?
Hey, this is Golden Brawler, your resident King Boo, King of the Boos, and host of One Soul Down. Speaking of, this has been sponsored by One Soul Down. Go watch it, please. Just watch. Boo Lake is a fairly simple track, but a chaotic mess on 200cc. It has good implementation of the underwater segment, showing this place has really gone downhill over the years. The disrepair really gives it a more unique feeling than the original slab. Oh boy, my favorite is square. It keeps the basic map shape the same. Is pretty, quote, is cool. Fuck this stupid idea of driving off the road and onto the railings, though. Oh yeah, sure, let me save 5 minutes off my commute to work by grinding on the rails like it's a skate title! Just like, laying on the fucking fuck! Other than that, it's just fun to drive on. It makes brain particles go vroom. Like, what do you want from me? It's good. It's good. It's TJ.
You know that literally no one else is gonna get that joke, right?
And I don't care.
Rock Mountain. I have precisely one thing to thank Rock Mountain for, and that is the fact that without Rock Mountain, I guarantee you, we'd still be living in a world where getting shocked takes you out of your glider. And Rock Mountain fixes that strictly because of the fact that they realized, oh, you're in a glider a good 50% of the race. Getting shocked here would not be fun. They realized the fundamental flaws of the way that glider mechanics currently work because of how much this track uses the glider. Outside of that though, yeah, no, being in a glider for 50% of the race isn't fun. And on top of that, it's also a bit of a bagging track. For every part that you're not in a glider, I can say it's pretty fun. But for fuck's sake, man, I don't feel anything. Like, in 7 at least, like, gliding physics that were a lot more noticeable. In this game, it feels like you're on a rail shooter or something like that, where it feels like you have a general control over where you go, but you're still confined to, like, a box that, like, you don't have nearly as much control over, and it's weird. Maple Treeway is as unoffensive as a track as you can possibly get. Nothing negative to say about Maple Treeway. It just drives incredibly well. I still haven't decided over time how I feel about the leaf pile change. I think I actually do like it, because getting a star from a leaf pile is just blatantly overpowered, and I feel like having a banana drop isn't something that necessarily benefits that much, whereas I feel like when you hit a leaf pile, you know there's a chance you get a mushroom and nothing else. The pressure that puts on you to be the one person that hits that mushroom rather than the person behind you, because the person behind you, if you miss that mushroom, the person behind you is getting it for free. And I feel like that's like a really small dynamic that goes a long way on this track. Otherwise, it just drives incredibly well. It keeps up that philosophy that I feel like the Booster Course Pass does really well, of taking tracks and emphasizing on how well they drive. Because in Mario Kart Wii, this track was a custom track. The geometry that existed on Maple Treeway was a complete and utter mess. I think part of that added a certain charm to the Wii version, but I would be lying if I said this version isn't just better in every way in terms of what a track should be. It's a very similar way that I would personally say that Mario Kart Wii is my favorite Mario Kart game to control, but that I think Mario Kart Double Dash is the definitive, like, this is the get it out, play it with your friends Mario Kart game, where I can say Wii is my personal favorite, but I think Double Dash is the better Mario Kart game. And I think that same thought process applies to Maple Treeway, where it's like, oh yeah, the Maple Treeway version is jank in a lot of hilarious and very fun ways. It's just better here, and it takes the strengths of Wii and just plays off of them, and just flattens it out, makes it good.
TJ, wait!
Wait, Topin? What are you doing here?
Oh, thank God. I'm not too late. Oh, hey, are you playing Maple Treeway?
Well, I am talking about Maple Treeway.
No kidding. I always enjoy talking about Maple Treeway whenever it's brought up in conversation. It's more of a medical condition than a personal pastime, but I enjoy it all the same.
Right, but what was that you were saying about not being too late?
Maple Treeway is among my favorite tracks in the entire Mario Kart series. The original version on Wii perfectly encapsulates this warm, welcoming vibe of autumn in both its setting and especially in its music. The thrill of driving through a series of interconnected trees and logs, flying through the leaves of a massive tree and then scaling it up to the top, zooming past two massive wigglers and then revving back down to the surface, all the while the music gives this really satisfying blend of serenity with the world you're in and excitement with what may be around the corner. There are quite the number of tracks in the series where the setting is enhanced by the fact that you are scaled significantly smaller to really feel like you are traversing through these typically mundane areas, and Maple Treeway is the finest example of that. And that's just the Wii version. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's Maple Treeway retains a lot of the charm and awe of the original version, and even went so far as to reclaim features from the original that were lost in Mario Kart 7's version of this track, such as the half pipe during the second half of the course. Though on the flip side, every other game that brought this track back removed features such as the bouncy net bridge placed at the final stretch of the Wii's version, all just to replace it with a glider ramp that personally feels like it adds nothing but a chance for you to nab coins as opposed to trick-assisted speed boosts, which is baffling to me on a personal level. There are also a few other changes that I'm more indifferent to, such as how the track feels relatively wider than the original version, and the skylight having this kind of bloom effect on it. I at least appreciate 8's efforts to make it feel like you're actually racing inside a maple tree, with adding more leaves in the outward environment, and implementing more log assets into the course, such as the segments shortly after the aforementioned half-pipe. All in all, while I prefer the Wii's version on a technical level, 8's Maple Treeway is a netted bridge away from being a perfect track. Anyway, I forgot what I came here to warn you about, but I'm sure it'll work out either way. Bye, Teach!
Hold up, what were you trying to warn me about? I'm sure it's nothing.
You have received a voicemail.
Oh boy, Berlin Byways. This is my favorite city track. Hands down, not even a competition. I love Berlin Byways. Part of it has to do with the music, but part of me really likes just how much. It feels like with Berlin Byways, you get much more of a thorough adventure through an entire city. Like this is a Woohoo Loop-esque track. This is what they were trying to do with Tokyo Blur, but that they actually succeeded with here. It's also another traffic track that actually handles it well by having some genuinely difficult turns to avoid them during, with like these medians that make the middle lane like harder to be in, obstacles on the side of the road. It has a decent balance of traffic and no traffic. It does a lot right, and I love everything about it. And the fact that they took the effort. TW98 called out Nintendo from the fact that it wasn't possible. They have these womps at the Berlin Wall section where you can trick off of them, and TW98 makes a video calling out Nintendo for the fact like, oh, this is some lame Lakitu placement stopping you from taking a cool expert shortcut that could exist. Nintendo, in a future patch, then removed that Lakitu from the spot. And that is incredibly cool to me. Like, if that doesn't specify the degree of which Nintendo is willing to let you have fun with this booster course pass, I don't know what does. There's so much about Berlin Byways that I think it perfectly encompasses what the booster course does right. And yet despite that, it could apparently still be better? Apparently so. Take it away, Mero.
You'd think considering Mario Kart Tour is a mobile game and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe isn't, porting its tracks over would be an improvement by default. And while a lot of people definitely enjoyed Berlin Byways, I can't help but feel disappointed its unique gameplay mechanics were left behind. City tracks in Mario Kart Tour are made up of 3 to 4 routes, with each route being considered a different track. Instead of choosing a route to remake, Nintendo took the course model and tried to create a path across 3 sections that includes as many areas of the model as possible. Sometimes this was done by retreading the paths taken in Tour, and sometimes they did their own thing. For Berlin Byways, they used Berlin Byways 2, then 3, then 1 as a rough guideline, and I think all 3 were done much better in the original. The first lap had a super interesting mechanic in Tour. There were alternating glider panels like in TikTok Clock, and players who chose to fly would swoop down to trick up the cars Subway Surfer style. This mechanic was replaced with a straight line with nothing to do. Then there was this train that contained an extra item box, and while this is still an 8 Deluxe, it's not really worth getting due to the differences in controls and walls acting like walls. The second lap is all cars. While we saw the bomb car return for Wii Mushroom Highway, the Piranha Plant car was not brought back for Tour Berlin Byways 3, which is disappointing again, and could have been a nice addition to separate it from the other traffic courses. The third lap features these wumps, which don't even fall until you pass them half the time. This is a really cool mechanic for a multi-lap track in Tour, now feeling pointless and wasted. While Nintendo did add this weird gap jump shortcut, it's very janky and clearly an afterthought. I think Berlin Byways would have worked much better if they picked a route and made it 3 laps rather than trying to shoehorn everything together. Instead of getting the best of 3 worlds for Mario Kart Tour, we got a watered-down, generic romp through the city. No wonder people seem to hate these so much.
Peach Gardens is interesting. Alright, Peach Gardens is another S tier, and let me tell you why. Peach Gardens has a very interesting dynamic where, in the way that it traditionally plays, that beginning shortcut gives you a massive breakaway. Once you get that initial mushroom shortcut, you're set for life. Like, you're good for the vast majority of the race, potentially even counting for future laps where other people can take that shortcut. Then lap 2 happens. You get through the massive grass cut that can change the entire course of the race. You have a huge amount of time to just properly build your lead and to just let you have this front run, especially as you go into the third lap, in which you go through this courtyard section that prompts you to race the track backwards. Now, it's one thing to say that, like, yeah, it's just a cool bit of variety. But no, this genuinely affects the track in a meaningful way. Because by driving backwards, what this allows you to do is it allows you to have all of this time in the world to prepare for the fact that what is now the most important part of determining the race is at the very end. And as a result of that, now with the person who's in first having had plenty of time to build their lead exactly how they want to, just to prepare them from the challengers they will face of the people cutting through that grass cut at the very end, resulting in some of the most dynamic finishes to races I have ever seen. And it is so fun every time, and I love watching how it plays out. Absolutely flawless track. I no notes. And just in case all of that wasn't enough to convince you, here's my friend Chase from the YTPMV community to tell you even more.
As someone who has fond memories of playing Mario Kart DS and Mario Kart Wii in my childhood, Peach Gardens is one of the few tracks that's always stuck out to me. It's a shining example of how the Mario Kart series can build upon the world of Mario, taking inspiration from established locations and characters from outside of the franchise. And so, DS Peach Gardens is a pretty good example of this. It's a track seemingly inspired by the courtyard of Peach's castle from Super Mario 64, but expanded to have more of an elegant royal garden theme. Added background details such as gazebos, fountains, and spectators turns Peach Gardens into something much more livelier than its original counterpart. I'd even argue that the course looks on par with Mario Kart 8's base game courses, thanks to its pretty use of foliage and detailed textures and its warm outdoor colors. Peach Gardens initially plays how you'd expect it to, though the changes become more apparent as the race progresses. Flower patches and barricades have been relocated or removed, presenting racers with better opportunities for mini turbos and more wiggle room for items. The Hedge Chomp Maze section includes new topiary depicting Luigi, Peach, Toad, and Toadette, complementing the course's existing Mario sculpture. In turn, this also results in the roaming chain chomps being more visible. Some trick ramps from Wii were cut, but new trick spots were added. The addition of the giant piranha plant makes for something more engaging, warning the player to not drift too close to the center, or else they risk getting hurt. However, nothing is stopping the player from, say, taking intentional damage by the piranha plant to dodge a shell. I've neglected to talk about the biggest change here, the third lap. You race through the gardens once more, but backwards. It becomes a turning point in the race where you must change strategies. For example, you may have the chance to hit oncoming players that are still behind in lap 2. There's also the newly installed glider section as you circle back around to the Chomp Maze, allowing you to keep your forward momentum on the off chance that somebody uses the lightning bolt. The Lap 3 change incorporates an unused pathway that is present in both the original DS and Wii versions of Peach Garden. It's fun to think that the original vision of Peach Gardens may have circled back around with this remake. Overall, I would also put Peach Gardens in S tier. Maybe partly due to nostalgia, but it's just a damn good course. DS Peach Gardens serves as an example of how Mario Kart often does right with its course design. Its inclusion in the Booster Course Pass builds upon the original's theme and gameplay experience, with its enhanced visuals and elegant soundtrack, topping it off by adding a new layer of that classic Mario Kart chaos.
Moving on, we have Merry Mountain. This is another weird one, where I really kind of like it. I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. I'm not going to pretend it's, like, overwhelmingly good. But Merry Mountain, it's one of the few cases that handles a split path well, where you can take the top route to increase your coin count, or you can take the bottom route to take the objectively faster path, and just get that more immediate benefit. That's just the first section. It's a simple thing, but it's balanced and done well. After that, you enter the bridge section, which isn't really too interesting, but then you have the candle shortcut, which is a small shroom shortcut that is one of the more satisfying feeling shroom shortcuts in the game, but that's just an off-road cut. It's very similar to the donut cut in Sweet Sweet Canyon, and I think it's kind of probably the reason why Sweet Sweet Canyon is now in my F tier, is because of the fact that Merry Mountain does the same kind of shortcut, but better. I was talking about this way at the beginning, but I think snowy tracks, especially mountainous snowy tracks, tend to just have a pattern of just being fun to drive. Outside of that one candle shortcut, directly after that is one of the most satisfying just off-road cuts you can take, where everyone else has to go like this pretty wide route towards this like ring of item boxes, where if you have a mushroom, you can take this extremely satisfying tight turn, just churning through that off-road like butter, and it just feels wonderful. And while a lot of people may detract that what follows directly after this cut is the longest straightaway in the game, and by my own admission, this game is most fun when you have something to do, I would still argue this straightaway comes right after a set of item boxes. And even though I have talked in the past about how straightaways in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe are really boring, this one in particular feels less like an area of track design where they didn't know what to do, and more like an intentional open space where offensive items were designed to flourish and truly mix up how the race will possibly end. And it is for all those reasons that I will never be upset with the race on Merry Mountain, and I think that deserves A tier. 3DS Rainbow Road. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Time for chat to hate me. It is time for chat to hate me. Because 3DS Rainbow Road, it's eye candy. I don't know how to put it more than that, but that's what it is. Now, granted, to this track's defense, it does drive incredibly well. It feels very fun to drive, and in a time trial setting completely free of items, it is perhaps deserving of the moniker of maybe even one of the most fun tracks in the game. A large variety of a whole bunch of different turns, a lot of different terrain, and plenty of different chains of boost panels and tricks and all sorts of other stuff that you can do all throughout the entire track. You are always doing something on 3DS Rainbow Road. But it's yet another instance of don't get hit, motherfucker, because if you get hit, guess what? You're not catching back up to first. It's over. You no longer are in the race. You make a mistake on 3DS Rainbow Road, you're no longer effectively a part of the race. 3DS Rainbow Road, I've compared it before to Super Mario 64, the course Rainbow Ride, where it feels like 3DS Rainbow Road just has a lot of ideas, but does not meaningfully know how to connect them all. There have been many times in the past where I have looked at Rainbow Ride, and I have called it the junkyard of Super Mario 64. And what I mean by this is that it's kind of the home of all of the remaining ideas that the developers didn't know how to meaningfully connect, just kind of lazily given new purpose in the sky. And while some of these elements are really cool, such as the flying airship, some of them just feel remarkably out of place. Why are there random pendulums in the sky? Why is there just random geometry? Why is there a giant freaking house for no reason? None of it exactly comes together to feel like anything more than just a bunch of objects lazily thrown about in the sky. 3DS Rainbow Road feels the exact same way to me, where I feel like the idea for 3DS Rainbow Road was to way more openly adopt a space theming, along the lines of what you see when you drive on all these planets. But midway through this idea, they remember that they have to be making a Rainbow Road, and rather than focusing on a layout that's just simply fun to drive, they went overboard with trying to implement every single idea they could possibly think about. Instead of just letting a good layout speak for itself, they insist on throwing about random mushrooms, treadmills, giant spinny funnels, and try to use all of them in a way that by the very end, they need to spring about boost panels all over the place, forego even the idea of doing multiple laps, and use cannon gliders just to loosely connect these random ideas. It is by far the most scatterbrained design for a Mario Kart track that has ever been implemented. And for years, I have lamented every single time I have watched it top someone's list as the best designed Mario Kart track, all while its music does little more than subsist as a toned-down version of the masterpiece that Kenta Nagata created decades ago. All of this resulting in a track that does not remotely feel like it comes together to form a meaningful whole. And yet, after all of these years of proclaiming it as my least favorite track in all of Mario Kart, I have finally begun to appreciate it. And while I still do not believe it is even remotely close to being one of the best Mario Kart tracks ever created, I think I am willing to say that it's good. That I am willing to race on this track, and even though I don't always have complete control over how my race goes, that I'm still willing to see it through, and that I will enjoy the ride while it lasts. Because as I said earlier, there is always something to be doing on 3DS Rainbow Road. And even though a lot of it may just be set decoration, it can still be a lot of fun. Because not every single track needs to have this grand, death-defying leap over the unknown to be well made. Not every track needs to figure out how every turn needs to be balanced in order to create an enjoyable experience for its racers. And I have fully come to terms with the fact that I enjoy racing on this track. But no matter how much I have begun to appreciate this track, nothing will ever change the fact that once you make a mistake, there's not really a point anymore. And it is for that reason that I never see this track reaching higher than B tier. I said before that a road should be a little bit more than just a road where you go. And I'd say that we still have just a little bit further to go before we get there. Thanks for watching.
Whew boy, that was quite an emotional way to end that one. If for some reason you stuck through this whole thing, I appreciate the hell out of you, and chances are you appreciated what I made to some degree, so consider sticking around. Obviously, I still have 24 more tracks to cover, and quite frankly, I think a lot has changed since I started this series. So at the very end of it all, I'm going to do a supercut version of this, where I redo some of the entries I really didn't like, this time going from the worst to the best. If that's something you want to see, be sure to like, subscribe, and either get a browser extension that fixes your sub box or ring the bell. Before I finally end this video, I'd like to give one final shout out to all these amazing people who agreed to share their thoughts on whatever Mario Kart track they had interest in. I really enjoyed bringing on a few friends in the last video to talk about some of the tracks that they like and that I don't have much to say about, and I'm really glad I continued that tradition. But that's about all I have to say for right now, so hope y'all have a good one.